So let's take a look at some other technological advancements. On December 17th, 1903, I'm sure you're familiar with what happened on the day based upon the image that we have here. Orville Wright took a flight on a small engine plane that was airborne for 12 seconds at 120 feet. So we're talking about the evolution of flight. World War I planes were used. They were often known as the flying coffins. They were not very safe. Also, the shape of them also reminded people of a coffin. 1920, the first transcontinental airmail route went from New York to San Francisco. But probably the biggest development of the 20 and probably the most important people, at least well known, was pilot Charles Lindbergh. In 1927, he electrified the world by being the first individual to cross the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris. He did it in the plane that he's standing in front of, known as the Spirit of St. Louis. It took him 33 hours and 39 minutes to fly directly. So in comparison, that's a flight that may take 12 hours, give or take an hour or two, but then roughly 34 hours. And what it did is it gave a strong boost to the aviation industry. So by the 30s and 40s, travel by air was significantly safer than highways. Lindbergh became a very, very, very popular and important individual. Earlier I mentioned how his child was actually abducted and murdered. And it was a really sad situation, obviously because of what happened, but also, Lindbergh being a great individual, an American hero almost, to see it happen was a tragic thing that really shook the nation. 1920s was also an era in which film started to really move forward. Probably what it was best known for early on was one of the first moving pictures, known as The Jazz Singer. So the new era begins with The Jazz Singer in 1927. A white actor by the name of Al Jolson, as you could see him on the billboard up front, was in blackface. So he was playing a black character. So this was something that was popular within the 1920s, known as blackface, but obviously something that is, obviously very socially unacceptable. Actors and actresses during this time often made $100,000 per film, which is a lot, but if you compare it to Johnny Depp when he did the Pirates of the Caribbean films, he was making roughly $20 million. We call this the dynamic decade too. The census, the 1920 census actually, since it's done every 10 years, revealed for the first time that more people were living in the cities than in the countryside. So if you look at the image that we have here, the gray area is the cities, the darker or black areas would be more rural areas. Some people often said that the clock struck 6 o'clock in America. Some advertisers exploited sexual allure to sell everything from soap to car tires to toilets. Once modest women proclaimed their freedoms as flappers, or new women, as we see in this image here, where they bobbed their hair and they shortened their dresses, elevated hemlines, breasts taped flat, stockings were rolled, cheeks were rough, red lipsticks, smoking cigarettes, all elements of flapper culture. They shocked the elders, oftentimes when wearing one-piece bathing suits. So taboos really flew out the window. Teens pioneered new sexual frontiers. Kissing used to be the equivalent of marriage. Oftentimes people would, exploratory youth sat in dark theaters, automobiles as what they came to be known as neckers or petters, and poached upon forbidden territory, let's just say, of others' bodies. Probably one of the most important things is the racial pride that blossoms in New York. Counting some roughly 100,000 African Americans in New York after World War I, what we start to see the growth of is the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem was one of the most vibrant and largest black communities in the world. And what it did is it was really a rebirth, or it sustained vibrant and creative culture that nourished poets such as Langston Hughes and musicians as well, Duke Ellington, among many others. It often spawned political leaders as well. Marcus Garvey is probably the most well-known, and he promoted a resettlement of American blacks back to Africa, hence the Back to Africa movement. It led to self-confidence and pride among black culture, and really his example led to the founding of the Nation of Islam, which would be led by Malcolm X in future decades. There's also a cultural liberation. In the decade after the war, a new generation of writers burst onto the scene. They wrote about vitality, imaginativeness, artistic quality. They probed new codes of morals, understanding, and expression. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Side of Paradise, was basically the Bible for youth and promoted fun. The Great Gatsby promoted glamour and the cruelty of achievement and cruelty of an achievement-oriented society. Ernest Hemingway's A Sun Also Rises was, carefree Americans living abroad, and Farewell to Arms was about someone's war experience. To wrap it up, let's take a look at how the decade is going to kind of wind down. The stock market enjoyed a dizzying bull market, otherwise known as a rising period of stocks. Speculation ran wild where people were trying to buy stocks to get rich quick, oftentimes selling them minutes or days later. People often bought stocks on margin, which is a form of buying on credit. So you would pay as little as 10% of the stock price up front to a broker. The buyer then paid the broker for the rest of the stock over a period of months. Stock served as collateral or security for the broker's loan, and as long as the price of the stocks rose, the buyer had no problem paying off those loans to make a profit. An example was a valet actually parlayed his measly wages into $250,000. So we'll take a look at that as we move into the 1930s. But just to kind of wrap it up, the tax starts to go down in the 1920s also. Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury under President Harding, lowered taxes and cut spending. Instead of sinking deeper into debt, the Treasury actually showed a surplus. So both Harding and Mellon favored laissez-faire approach to economics, which reduced the national debt by over $10 billion.